over the next few weeks, I'll be highlighting a new series on the channel, and it will be taking a look back at every single year of my life in gaming. Where will I start? Let's find out. G'day invaders, welcome to Spacies, and this is going to be the start of an ongoing series. Now, one day I got to thinking, I've been playing a heck of a lot of games in my life, hence the name Spacies. Now, for those of you that don't know, the name Spacies is referring to this game here, Space Invaders, and that was pretty much the first game that I ever got to play, and I was around about, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 at the time. So I've been putting in a lot of gaming time over the years, and I'm actually quite glad that I was born when I was born, because as I have grown up, I've always said that as I grew, the gaming grew, the gaming industry that is grew, and it's always been really cool to see how gaming has progressed to this epic multi-billion-dollar industry that it is today. In fact, just on the way to work, I spotted at least 3 video game commercials on buses, on the sides of trains and whatnot, and I just thought this is way different to what I was growing up with back in the 80s and the 90s. And I got to thinking, with all that gaming experience, it's probably a good idea to take a look back at gaming on a year-by-year basis and just go over the highlights of each individual year. Now, I was originally going to call this My Life in Gaming, but I realised that one, the title's a bit weak, to be quite honest, and two, someone had already taken that title, and I didn't want to have them accuse me of plagiarism. So I figured I'm going to change this to Gaming Since Spacies, which is pretty much the concept around the channel and the reason why I'm here on YouTube to begin with. And what I'm going to do is that I was originally going to start from 1974, the year I was born, but to be quite honest, not really a lot of events happened in that era from 1974 up until when Space Invaders started. So what I'm going to do is, this intro is just going to be a brief look at 1974 right up to 1977, but the series, this Gaming Since Spacies series, will start on the next video, and it will feature 1978. But for now, I'm just going to take a quick look back at my first year on this stupid forsaken planet that we call Earth. So the first game to feature human figures was Basketball. Woo, great name, guys. And that was released by Taito. So yeah, so the very first game to figure a human body. It sounds really bizarre when you talk about it now, but yeah, it happened in 1974. So there you go. Also, the first arcade gaming magazine called Playmeter was released. So even as early as back as 1974, there was some press to commentate what was happening in the industry. So that's pretty cool. Maze Wars is released at the NASA Research Center, and it's basically seen as the first person shooter. Not really sure it would be an overly exciting game, but that's where it started. So yeah, 1974. So many breakthroughs in that year. Also, Dungeons and Dragons, or it was just simply called D&D, is released for the Plato system and is regarded as the first game to feature a boss. And it's also possibly considered the first role-play game. This is all happening in 1974. It's just pretty hard to fathom that this is over 40 years ago that this stuff was happening. The Magnavox console, which I'll leave a picture up, is reissued and it debuts in Australia for the first time. It also is released in several parts of Europe as well. So my first game of the year for 1974, the first year that I was on this planet, was a game called Grand Trax 10. Now, I actually played this game when I was a little kid, and it was pretty cool. It's kind of like Micro Machines with black and white graphics. Real simple concept, a car on an overview with tracks that changed. Very simple concept, but was hell of a lot playable, and it was just really cool to see back in the day. So then we skip forward to 1975. Not a lot really happened in this year. We've got the very first Japanese console ever released from a company called Epoch. But funnily enough, it actually had wireless controllers. It was using like a radio UHF control style. And yeah, that was pretty interesting that they would go down that path rather than using wired controllers. I think they were just trying to show off as being convenient and easy to use, when in reality those things were probably really weren't reliable, to be quite honest. And also Pong was released to the home as a console, and that was pretty much the premise of the first commercially successful game in history was Pong. Not really my choice. I mean, I did have a Pong machine. It was called from a company called Sheen, and I had that back in the early 80s. It was fun for a little bit, but it really did grow old real quick. Interestingly enough, it had its own speaker, and rather than using the sound from the TV, the sound would come from the console. The other thing I remember is that it had controls that got packed away with it that were wired, hardwired. And the other thing was that it actually could also run on batteries rather than being plugged into the wall. Don't know what happened to that machine. I wish I kept on to that. And my game of the year for 1975 was Gunfight. Simply because there wasn't really much or else to choose from in that year. But I do remember playing it in the arcades when I was a kid. So then we've also got 1976, and so we see that Atari is purchased by Warner Brothers, and it was bought for a grand sum of $28 million. Back then, that would have been a staggering amount of money, and it would have been a lot of people questioning, why are you buying into this industry which hadn't even been proven? It was still very young and very experimental. So yeah, Warner Brothers, they laid down some cold hard cash, $28 million. Apple Computer starts as well, and interestingly enough, Apple Computer started, but before that became a thing, Steve Jobs and Wozniak developed Breakout, which was actually a pretty cool game, considering it's coming from a guy like Steve Jobs. He doesn't strike me as being one of the most fun and exciting guys on the planet when he was around. I don't think he really had much in the way of recreation or spare time for himself, but yet him and Wozniak came up with a really good game that year. Also, Sega creates Heavyweight Champ. What's so interesting about that? Well, guess what? It was the very first human versus human hand-to-hand combat game. There you go, another first in that era. Also, the very first outcry of violence in video game. Yes, 1976. The media were all over it, even as early as 1976. With a game called Death Race, which was based on a movie called Death Race 2000. So there you go. Violence in video games. Is that a new topic? No, not at all. As early as 1976, the media were hopping on the bandwagon and getting on and attacking this new fandangled technology, and not much has really changed. Game of the year for 1976, my pick, Breakout. Only because I played it and I liked it. Not really much or else as a choice for 1976. And the last year to feature in my little intro. Now again, my videos are going to be different from this. This is just an introduction to give you a bit of an idea of what I am going to be doing with this series. So in 1977, we had Electronic Boutique open. Now, they weren't selling games back then. They were originally started up as like your Tandy or Radio Shack or Dick Smith type job. They were just selling spare parts and components for radios. They later became EB Games, of course, but yeah, they opened up in 1977. Nintendo debuted their home console for the very first time, the Color TV6. Not a machine that I ever have got my hands on or got to play. And the Atari 2600, or back then it was known as the VCS, debuted. Probably goes up in my top 5 consoles of all time. Not because it's still playable today, but for what it did. It really did break open the barriers as far as getting people to actually buy and purchase a video game system, and it also got people into the habit of buying games to change over and play on that machine. So it wasn't the first console to do it, but it was the first console to be marketed and to do it right. So from that point of view, Atari, before certain corporate people got their hands on the Atari name, Atari back then were really breaking open the whole barriers and breaking down doors and whatnot. Yeah, I got a lot of respect for Atari in that early era, but not afterwards. Yeah. And Space Wars was the very first vector graphics game. So there's another little did you know. And my very first game, my game of the year, for 1977 was a game called Combat. I spent ages on that game. Also, one of the very first games that I seen featured in the comic Mad magazine. They did a feature on Combat, the game. I'm sure there was an issue where they did feature that. And it was probably one of the first two-player games that just got really violent, really quick when one person would be winning and the other person would rage quit. So, yeah. So there you go. That's just been a real rough look at the very first 4 years of my life. But my gaming life, that wasn't to start until 1978. Now, my very first game of the year for 1978, I think you guys will guess which one it's going to be. So I think the big feature for 1978, or the biggest surprise for that video, is going to be which game, two other games, get the runners up. So what I'm hoping to do with this series is go over the exciting things that happen in each year, and I'll also be looking at 3 games that I think inspired me for that year, or that I was impressed with, and I'll be picking from those 3 games the game of the year, starting from 1978, working my way all the way through to 2017 and beyond. So yeah, I hope you guys are looking forward to this series. I know I am. It doesn't sound like much on paper, but as I go through from 1978 and I work my way through the 80s, 90s, 2000 and onwards, the series I think will get more interesting and a little more controversial as I go on, as far as which games I feature for the game of the year. Leave your comments down below. I'd be interested to see what you guys thought of my choices of the game of the year for 74 to 77. Yeah, not really much in the way of controversy just yet. The controversy will come along, I promise you. There will be some choices that I will come up with, and I know you guys are not going to agree. I'm looking forward to seeing your comments in the series as it continues. But yeah, until then, I'd like to give a big shout out to all my Patreons. I have the Jose Rivera, the Bit Vault, the Gaming Archaeologist, and also Sarah Wilson. You guys are awesome. I really do love to see you guys hopping on board there with the Patreon. If you guys also want to join in on the Patreon, there's a link below. Also, I have a PO Box. It's PO Box 192 Janelli, New South Wales 2226. You'll see the address. Don't forget to subscribe, because I've got way more videos. I've got my gaming podcast. Yes, another bloody gaming podcast. Number 4. It's coming up very soon. I've got the guys already organised to sign up for that. That will be coming up at the beginning of December. And I have also got my look at Resident Evil 4 on the GameCube, my look at the Sega Mega Drive Ultimate Collection on the Xbox, which is also playable on the PlayStation 3. You can get a version for that. There's a lot happening on this channel, so much that I can hardly get time to do it. Anyway, my name's been Brian, and I've been gaming since Spacies. Thanks, guys.